That cold morning, no one expected an act of compassion to change everything. What started as another quiet day near the reserve became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, every roar and every breath matters, because behind every white tiger there is a story worth saving. The frost clung to the pines like a fragile promise, the kind that breaks under the weight of winter's indifference. Elias Thorne had risen before dawn, as he always did, in his cabin on the edge of the Blackwood Reserve. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. He was a man of routines, coffee black as the night sky, boots laced tight against the chill, and a rifle slung over his shoulder, not for hunting, but for the ghosts of what might wander too close to the fences. At 52, Elias had seen enough of the wild to know it didn't beg for mercy. It just endured. But that morning, as he stepped onto the creaking porch, something shattered the silence. Not a roar, but a low, ragged breath like wind scraping through hollow bones. He froze, his hand midway to the thermos. There, in the grey light filtering through the trees, stood the white tiger. It wasn't the first sighting. Whispers had circulated through the ranger station for months. A lone male, ghost pale against the shadowed forest, slipping through the underbrush like a memory no one wanted to claim. Poachers had taken his pride years ago, or so the tracks suggested. Scattered pelts found in the hills, blood long dried. This one had survived, a rarity in a world that prized his fur over his life. But now he was no phantom. He was real, his massive form outlined against the snow-dusted ground, eyes like fractured ice fixed on Elias. In his jaws, dangling limp, was a cub. Small, no more than a few weeks old, its white fur matted and streaked with mud. The tiger's breath came in shallow huffs, clouds blooming in the cold, and he took a hesitant step forward. Not aggressive, not charging, pleading. The cub didn't stir, its tiny chest rising and falling in faint, erratic pulses. Elias's heart stuttered. He'd patrolled these woods for 2 decades, faced down bears and wolves. But this was different. The tiger lowered his head, the cub brushing the frozen grass, and let out a sound that wasn't a growl. It was a whine, deep and broken, vibrating through the air like a father's unspoken prayer. Elias backed up a step, his boot crunching on the porch boards. The rifle felt heavy, useless. "Easy now," he murmured, voice barely above the wind. The tiger didn't advance further. He just stood there, flanks heaving, eyes locked on the man as if weighing his soul. The cub's eyes were half open, milky with exhaustion, and a faint whimper escaped its throat, weak, like the last flicker of a dying fire. Blood? No, not that. Just the raw edge of survival, the scent of desperation mingling with wet fur and pine sap. Inside the cabin, the radio crackled faintly. Forgotten. Elias's mind raced. Call the rangers. Dispatch would come with tranks and protocols, nets and cold efficiency. They'd seen white tigers before, smuggled, shot, or worse. This one had evaded them all, raising a cub in secret, perhaps. But now the plea hung between them. Save it, or let nature claim what was hers. Elias's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of eyes that saw too much. The tiger's gaze wasn't wild. It was knowing, ancient, stripping away the barriers of species. He knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, like approaching a storm cloud. The tiger tensed, muscles rippling under that ethereal coat, but he didn't flee. Elias extended a hand, palm up, the universal gesture of truce. The cub's breathing hitched, a tiny rattle that pierced the quiet. "What happened to you, boy?" Elias whispered, more to himself. The forest held its breath, the drip of melting ice from the eaves, the distant call of a raven, the tiger's labored exhales. No answers came, only the slow circle of the great cat, as if guarding his young while testing this human's intent. Memories flooded Elias then, unbidden. His own son, lost to the river 10 years back, small and still in the current, the helplessness, the what-ifs that clawed at night. He shook it off, but the parallel lingered, sharp as the cold. This wasn't the same. Animals didn't grieve like men. Or did they? The tiger nudged the cub gently with his nose, a low rumble escaping. Encouragement or farewell? Elias's throat tightened. He couldn't just watch. Reaching for the door, he eased inside, grabbing a blanket from the chair by the fire. The tiger watched every motion, unblinking. Outside again, Elias spread the blanket on the ground, inches from the cub. "Come on, then. Bring him here." The words felt absurd, spoken to a beast that couldn't understand. But the tiger did something then, shifted forward, jaws careful, depositing the cub onto the fabric with a tenderness that belied his size. The little one's body was cold to the touch, limbs limp but alive. Barely. Elias wrapped it swiftly, his calloused fingers brushing soft fur that glowed like fresh snow. The tiger backed away a fraction, sitting on his haunches, a sentinel in the mist. The reserve wasn't far, a 20-minute drive down the rutted road, but the cub needed warmth now, not jostling. Elias carried it inside, the tiger's eyes following through the window. In the cabin's glow he assessed, dehydrated, hypothermic, perhaps injured from a fall or predator chase. The mother's absence gnawed at him. Where was she? The tiger outside pawed the door once, a soft thump that echoed like a heartbeat. Elias glanced out. The great cat hadn't moved, his breath fogging the glass, waiting. As the first light crept over the hills, Elias radioed the station. "This is Thorn. Got a situation. White tiger cub, critical, and the father's... He's here." Static, then voices, doubtful, urgent. Ranger Lena Voss, sharp as a blade, responded first. "Elias, you sure? That's no stray dog. Could be rabid, or worse." Her tone carried the weight of policy. Contain, assess, euthanize if necessary. But Elias cradled the cub, feeling its faint warmth seep through the blanket. He's not rabid. He's begging. Outside, the tiger's eyes met his through the pane, a silent pact forming in the dawn. The town of Blackwood slumbered on, unaware that compassion had already cracked the morning wide open. Engines would rumble soon, rescuers arriving with questions and fears. But for now, in the hush, it was just a man, a dying cub, and a white tiger who refused to let go. The wind picked up, carrying the promise of what was to come. Tension, revelation, and a bond forged in the fragility of life. The cabin's walls seemed to close in as Elias waited, the cub bundled against his chest like a fragile secret. Its breaths were shallow whispers now, each one a thread fraying in the quiet. He paced the worn floorboards, the scent of pine resin from the fire mingling with the faint milky tang of the animal's fur. Outside, the white tiger hadn't budged, a pale statue etched against the rising sun, his flanks rising and falling in rhythm with the cub's struggle. Elias glanced through the frost-laced window, meeting those ice-blue eyes again. There was no snarl, no threat, just a patient vigil, as if the great cat understood the fragility of time. The radio hissed to life, shattering the hush. "Thorn, this is Voss. ETA 10 minutes. Stay put. Do not engage." Lena's voice cut through the static, clipped and professional, the kind honed from years of corralling chaos in the Blackwood Reserve. Elias didn't respond immediately. He eased into a chair by the hearth, the cub's tiny form warming slightly against the blanket's folds. Its eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused, a soft mewl escaping like a sigh. Elias's hand hovered, not touching, just shielding. "Hang on, little one," he murmured. the words dissolving into the crackle of flames. The road to the cabin was a serpentine scar through the forest, flanked by skeletal oaks and the occasional flash of deer tracks in the snow. Lena Voss arrived first, her truck skidding to a halt in a spray of gravel. At 38, she was the reserve's backbone, tough, pragmatic. With scars from a cougar encounter that still ached in the cold, she stepped out, trank gun slung low, her breath clouding the air as she scanned the tree line. No sign of the tiger yet, but the air felt charged, heavy with unspoken warnings. Behind her, in the passenger seat, sat Dr. Harlan Reed, the local vet, his kit already open on the dash. Harlan was older, mid-60s, with hands steady from decades of stitching up strays and farm animals, but wildlife like this, rare, dangerous. His face was a mask of quiet reservation, eyes narrowed against the wind. They approached the porch together, boots crunching over frozen leaves. Elias met them at the door, the cub cradled in his arms. Lena's gaze flicked to it first, white as fresh powder, ribs visible under taut skin, a faint tremor in its limbs. "Jesus, Elias, where's the mother?" Her voice was low, urgent, but laced with the edge of protocol. She didn't reach for the cub. Instead, she peered past him into the shadows of the cabin, then out toward the trees. "No sign," Elias replied, stepping aside to let them in. The warmth hit like a wall, the fire's glow casting long shadows. Harlan set his bag down with a soft thud, pulling on gloves. "Hypothermic, dehydrated, possible internal trauma. We need to stabilize now." His tone was clinical, but his eyes betrayed a flicker. Pity, perhaps, or the weariness of too many lost causes. He knelt by the chair, listening to the cub's chest with a stethoscope, the metal disc cold against fur. The tiny heart fluttered erratically, a Morse code of desperation. Outside, the tiger stirred. A low chuff echoed, not aggressive, but a reminder. Lena tensed, her hand drifting to the trank. "He's close. Elias, you said the father brought it? That's not normal." She moved to the window, peering out. There he was, emerging from the mist, his massive paws silent on the snow. He paced a slow circle, 20 yards off, eyes fixed on the cabin, not charging, not fleeing, just watching, his tail flicking like a metronome of anxiety. The sight sent a chill through her, deeper than the frost. White tigers were myths made flesh, poachers' prizes, not beggars at doorsteps. "We should call it in, full team. This could go south fast." Elias shook his head, his voice steady but soft. "He's not a threat. Look at him. He's waiting." The words, hung in the air, met with silence. Harlan glanced up from the cub, injecting a saline drip with careful precision, the needle a whisper against skin. "Waiting for what? Nature doesn't negotiate, Elias. We've got protocols for a reason. That big one's a killer by instinct." His hands didn't shake, but his jaw tightened, the moral line drawn. Save the cub if you can. But the father, a risk not worth taking. Memories surfaced for Harlan then, unbidden, a farm dog he'd failed to save years back, its eyes pleading as it bled out. But this was different, wilder. He focused on the cub, wrapping it in a heating pad, its body beginning to respond with faint twitches. The tension coiled like smoke. Lena radioed the station again, her voice a murmur into the device. "Back up en route, possible aggressive male, proceed with caution." But as she spoke, the tiger approached the porch steps, his breath visible in great plumes. He stopped at the threshold, nose twitching at the scent of his young inside. No roar, just a deep, rumbling exhale that vibrated through the wood. Elias moved to the door, cracking it open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the wild's raw edge. The tiger's gaze locked on him, then shifted to the bundle in Harlan's arms. A whine escaped, low and mournful, echoing the cub's earlier cries. Lena's hand gripped the trank tighter. Elias, back away, now! Her stance was fear wrapped in duty, the ranger's code, protect the humans first. But Elias held her gaze, his own eyes reflecting the firelight. If we dart him, we lose the cub's chance. He's not hurting us, he's trusting. The silence stretched, broken only by the cub's ragged breaths and the distant hum of approaching vehicles. Harlan paused his work, looking between them. Compassion warred with caution in his expression, the vet who mended broken wings but knew when to let go. The tiger sat then, heavy body settling into the snow, his head tilting as if listening to the life inside. It was a gesture of surrender, or perhaps alliance in the language of beasts. Elias knelt by the door, the threshold a fragile barrier. "We're trying, boy, hold on." No one moved for a long moment, the forest holding its collective breath. The first rays of sun pierced the canopy, gilding the tiger's fur in gold, highlighting the scars hidden beneath. Faded lines from traps or fights long past. Backup arrived in a convoy of dust and urgency. 2 more rangers, a wildlife tech named Mira, young and idealistic, her face pale with awe. She gasped at the sight of the tiger, whispering, "He's beautiful, but God, he's huge." The group clustered on the porch, murmurs rippling, fearful judgments bubbling up. "Shoot it," one ranger muttered. "It's a freak of nature, probably escaped from some circus hell." Mira shot him a glare, her moral compass tilting toward wonder. "Or it's just surviving, like us." Inside, Harlan worked faster, the cub stabilizing under his care. A faint lick of its lips, a stronger heartbeat, but the real test loomed outside, where the tiger's patience frayed with each passing minute. Elias felt the weight of it all, the eyes on him, the plea in the air. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a mirror, reflecting choices made and unmade. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of change as the day unfolded into something none of them could predict. The cub's survival hung in the balance, but so did something deeper, the fragile thread of trust between man and wild. The sun climbed higher, casting elongated shadows across the cabin's yard, where the white tiger remained a steadfast sentinel. His coat, ethereal in the light, rippled with each controlled breath, muscles coiled beneath like coiled springs held in check. Inside, the air grew thick with the hum of activity. Harlan's tools, clinking softly as he adjusted the IV line, the cub's tiny form now swaddled in a makeshift incubator fashioned from a box and heated towels. Its chest rose and fell more steadily, but the fight was far from won. A faint wheeze lingered in its exhales, a reminder of the wilderness that had nearly claimed it. Elias stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the glass, watching the tiger's unyielding gaze. The great cat hadn't stirred since sitting, his head lowered slightly, ears twitching at every sound from within. It was as if he sensed the fragile progress, or perhaps mourned the absence of his mate, lost to poachers or the harsh winter. Elias could only guess. The ranger's hands clenched at his sides, the rifle long forgotten in the corner. Doubt crept in, a cold whisper. What if this trust was a mistake? The tiger's eyes, piercing and patient, seemed to answer. No malice, only the raw imperative of a father. Lena paced the room, her boots scuffing the rug, radio clipped to her belt, crackling with updates from the station. "Perimeters secure," she said, more to herself than anyone. Her face was a map of conflict, jaw set, but eyes softening when they fell on the cub. She'd grown up on these lands, daughter of a trapper who taught her the wild's unforgiving rules. Interfere and pay the price. Yet here she was, glancing at the tiger outside, his form a stark contrast to the snarling beasts in her nightmares. "We can't keep him waiting forever. If he charges..." Her voice trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging like mist. Harlan looked up from his work, wiping his brow with the back of his glove. The cub stirred under his touch, a weak paw flexing as warmth returned to its limbs. Vitals are improving. But he needs milk, real care, not this field setup. The vet's voice carried the weight of experience, his own history etched in the lines around his eyes. Years ago, he'd lost a patient on his table, a young colt, eyes pleading as it slipped away. That failure had hardened him, turned compassion into caution. Now, with the cub's soft fur brushing his fingers, something shifted. His hands, usually steady as stone, trembled faintly as he prepared a formula syringe. Mira, the young tech, hovered near the door, her idealism a quiet fire. She was new to Blackwood, fresh from college with dreams of conservation, not confrontation. Peering out, she whispered, "He's not going to charge. Look at him. He's protecting, not attacking." The other rangers on the porch shifted uneasily, one muttering about calling in animal control, his stance rigid with the fear of the unknown. "That thing's a killer. White or not, it's wild." Their words sliced the air, judgments born of ignorance, painting the tiger as a monster when all he offered was silence, a plea woven into his stillness. Elias turned from the window, his voice low, breaking the tension. "Enough! We're not shooting him!" He crossed to Harlan, kneeling beside the box. The cub's eyes opened wider now, milky blue like its father's, fixing on Elias with a trust that pierced deeper than any roar. A soft chuff came from outside, syncing with the cub's mule, a call and response across the threshold. Elias's breath hitched, memories of his son flooding back. The small hand in his, the river's cruel pull. He'd failed then, frozen by fear. Not this time. We move him to the truck, carefully. The father's following. Let him. Lena's eyes widened. "You're insane. That's a 2-ton predator." But her protest lacked conviction. She saw the resolve in Elias's face, the redemption flickering there. The group fell silent, the only sounds the fire's pop and the tiger's distant huff. Harlan nodded slowly, packing his kit. If we sedate the cub lightly for transport, it might work. But the male? We risk it all on instinct. His words were a bridge, compassion edging out caution, his trembling hands steadying as he administered the dose, a whisper of calm into the cub's vein. They prepared in hushed urgency, the cabin a cocoon of decision. Mira fetched a larger crate, lining it with blankets scented faintly of the forest to ease the cub's fear. Elias lifted it first, the weight light as a promise, cradling it against his chest. The cub nuzzled weakly, its warmth a spark against his shirt. Stepping onto the porch, he paused, the group fanning out behind him like wary shadows. The tiger rose fluidly, no snarl, just a low rumble that vibrated through the boards, a warning or approval. His eyes locked on the bundle, nostrils flaring at the familiar scent. The air crackled with moral suspense, every heartbeat a countdown. One ranger raised his trank, but Lena's hand stayed him, her own breath shallow. "Wait!" Elias descended the steps, the cub secure in his arms, and walked toward the truck parked in the drive. The tiger mirrored him, paws silent on the snow, keeping pace at a distance. Guardian, not intruder. 20 feet. 10. The great cat's flanks heaved, eyes never leaving his young. Elias's pulse thundered, tears pricking unbidden, fear for the cub, awe at the bond unfolding. This was no mere rescue. It was a reckoning, the tiger's silent judgment forcing them all to confront their humanity. They loaded the cub into the truck's bed, Harlan monitoring from the tailgate. The engine turned over with a reluctant growl, dust stirring in the crisp air. As Lena slid behind the wheel, the tiger paused at the tree line, his form silhouetted against the pines. He let out a single resonant chuff, part farewell, part vow, before melting into the shadows, his white coat vanishing like smoke. But Elias knew he wasn't gone. The wild didn't abandon its own. The convoy rumbled down the rutted road, the reserve's gates looming ahead. Inside the cab, silence reigned, broken only by the cub's steadying breaths. Harlan glanced at Elias, a quiet nod passing between them. Redemption's first taste, bitter and sweet. Yet tension lingered. The cub's crisis wasn't over, and the tiger's shadow followed, unseen but felt. The highway stretched empty before them, a ribbon of choices yet to unfold, where compassion's fragile thread could snap or weave something unbreakable. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and compassion can travel. The reserve's gates creaked open like reluctant confessions, the convoy easing through under a sky heavy with gathering clouds. Dust trailed behind the trucks, settling on the snow-dusted path that wound toward the wildlife center, a squat building of weathered brick, its windows fogged from the warmth within. Elias rode in the lead vehicle with Harlan, the cub's crate secured between them, its faint whimpers syncing with the engine's rumble. The air inside carried the sharp tang of antiseptic mixed with the cub's earthy scent, a reminder that the wild had breached their sterile world. Harlan's hands rested on the wheel, knuckles white, his gaze flicking to the rear view where the empty road stretched back toward the cabin. No sign of the tiger, but the silence felt alive, watchful. They pulled into the loading bay, doors slamming with muted urgency. The center's staff emerged like shadows, nurses in scrubs, a tech wheeling a gurney, their faces etched with the routine of crises that rarely involved miracles. Dr. Elena Marquez, the head vet, waited at the entrance, her dark eyes sharp under the brim of her cap. At 45, she'd patched up eagles and wolves, but a white tiger cub. That was legend territory, the kind that drew poachers and dreamers alike. "Status?" she asked. Voice clipped as Harlan lifted the crate. "Stabilizing, but weak. Hypothermia's lifting, dehydration's the killer now." Harlan's words were efficient, but his breath hitched as the cub stirred, a tiny paw pressing against the mesh. Elena nodded, gesturing them inside. The corridor hummed with fluorescent lights, the air cool and clinical, a far cry from the cabin's firelit hush. Elias followed, his boots echoing on the tile, the weight of the morning pressing on his shoulders. He'd carried the cub like a talisman, but here, in this place of protocols and charts, doubt seeped in. What if his instinct had been wrong? In the exam room, they transferred the cub to a padded table, its white fur stark against the green vinyl. Elena worked swiftly, her gloved hands probing gently, checking limbs, listening to the heart's erratic flutter. The cub's eyes, half-lidded, tracked the movements with a vulnerability that twisted something in Elias's chest. No roar from the father here, just the soft beep of monitors and the drip of fluids into a vein. "He's a fighter," Elena murmured more to herself as she adjusted the oxygen mask. A faint mist bloomed on the plastic with each exhale, labored but persistent. The room fell quiet, the team's breaths held in collective suspense, the moral line blurring between intervention and letting go. Lena lingered in the doorway, arms crossed, her ranger's jacket shedding flecks of snow. She'd radioed the station, confirming the perimeter sweep, no tracks of the male beyond the cabin. "That father's out there somewhere," she said, voice low, glancing at Elias. "If he follows, we're looking at a siege." Her words carried the edge of fear, the ranger's duty clashing with the scene before her, a tiny life teetering on the edge of their mercy. Mira, beside her, bit her lip, eyes fixed on the cub. The young tech's hands trembled as she handed over a warmed bottle of formula, her idealism cracking under the reality. "He trusted us to bring it here. What if he's waiting?" Harlan stepped back, peeling off his gloves, his face drawn. The cub took the nipple weakly, suckling in fits, milk dribbling from its muzzle. A small victory, but Elias saw the strain in Harlan's posture, the vet's history whispering through. Years ago, on a rain-slicked farm road, Harlan had arrived too late for a litter of orphaned fox kits, their mother shot by a panicked farmer. The guilt had carved lines into his brow, turning every rescue into a redemption he chased, but never caught. Now, watching the cub's throat bob, he whispered, "Come on, kid, don't make me fail you too." The words hung, unspoken empathy bridging the silence. Tension coiled as the monitors spiked, a sudden arrhythmia, the cub's body arching in silent protest. Eleanor's team surged forward, one nurse steadying the limbs while another prepped a syringe. "Cardiac event," Eleanor said, her voice steady but urgent, injecting a stabilizer with precision. The room blurred into motion, hands blurring, beeps accelerating, the cub's breaths hitching into whimpers that echoed like accusations. Elias pressed against the wall, heart pounding, the scene a mirror to his own loss. The river's rush, his son's final gasp. He clenched his fists, nails biting palms, willing the cub to fight as he hadn't fought that day. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the chain-link fence that bordered the center's pens. A low chuff echoed from the tree line, faint but unmistakable, the tiger. Heads turned, Lena drawing her sidearm instinctively. "He's here," she breathed, moving to the window. There, in the lengthening shadows, the white form materialized, pacing the perimeter like a ghost unwilling to fade, his eyes, luminous in the dimming light, fixed on the building. Nostrils flaring as if scenting his young through concrete and steel. No charge, no roar, just that patient vigil, a father's instinct defying the barriers humans built. The revelation hit Elias like cold water. The tiger hadn't abandoned them. He'd shadowed the convoy, silent through the miles, his presence a thread pulling at the edges of their world. "He followed," Elias said, voice thick. Stepping to Lena's side, the great cat paused, head tilting, a soft whine carrying on the breeze, recognition, perhaps, of the man who'd carried his cub. Lena's grip loosened on her weapon, her breath fogging the glass. "Damn it, he's not leaving." Her moral stance cracked, fear yielding to awe. The ranger who enforced boundaries now faced one that instinct ignored. Inside, the cub stabilized, the monitor's rhythm evening out to a fragile steadiness. Elena exhaled, stripping her gloves, her eyes meeting Elias's. "He's through the worst, for now. But he'll need monitoring, isolation from stressors." The words were a turning point, compassion's small act blooming in the quiet aftermath. Harlan sank into a chair, rubbing his temples, the tremor in his hands easing as he watched the cub curl into the blanket, exhausted but alive. Mira smiled faintly, tears held back, her whisper breaking the hush. "We did it, together." But the tiger's chuff sounded again, closer now, vibrating through the walls. The team exchanged glances, the emotional truth reframing the crisis. Not just a rescue, but a bond forged across divides. Elias moved to the door, peering into the dusk. The white tiger sat at the fence's edge, his form a symbol of misunderstood strength, pleading silently for the life he'd entrusted. The reserve's lights flickered on, casting halos in the gathering dark, as the weight of choice settled heavier, protect the cub or confront the father who refused to yield. The night deepened, engines cooling in the lot, the air thick with the promise of revelations yet to unfold, instinct's quiet justice waiting in the wings. The cub's first real mew pierced the silence, a spark of hope amid the uncertainty, pulling them all toward whatever dawn would bring. The night deepened over the Blackwood Reserve, the floodlights casting stark pools of yellow across the compound, turning the chain-link fence into a lattice of shadows. Inside the Wildlife Center, the exam room had settled into a fragile truce, the monitor's steady beeps a counterpoint to the wind's low moan outside. The cub lay curled in its incubator, flanks rising and falling in shallow rhythm, its white fur damp from the humidified air. Elias stood vigil by the window, his reflection ghosting over the glass, the tiger's form a pale blur beyond the fence. The great cat hadn't moved since dusk, his massive body hunkered low, eyes reflecting the light like distant stars, watchful, unyielding. Elena Marquez moved quietly among her team, checking charts under the harsh fluorescence. Her hands, steady from countless surgeries, paused now over the cub's file, the weight of rarity pressing down. White tigers weren't native here. This one was a survivor of the illegal trade, escaped or released, his lineage a whisper of captivity's cruelty. "He's holding," she said softly, more to the room than anyone, her voice threading the silence. Harlan nodded from his perch on a stool, his own exhaustion etched in the slump of his shoulders. The vet's eyes lingered on the cub, the earlier tremor in his fingers a memory now, replaced by a quiet resolve. Mira fussed with the IV line, her youthful face drawn, while Lena patrolled the hallway, radio silent but ever present. Outside, the tiger shifted, paws scraping faintly against the frozen earth, a sound that carried through the vents like a warning. Elias felt it in his bones, the vibration syncing with his pulse. The cub stirred in response, a faint chuff escaping its muzzle, as if echoing its father's call. The connection was visceral, unspoken, pulling at the edges of the room's sterile calm. Elias's breath fogged the pain, his mind drifting to the river's edge years ago, the mud-slick bank, his son's small form slipping away, the roar of water drowning his cries. He'd frozen then, hands outstretched but too late. Now this tiny life demanded action, its plea mirrored in the tiger's gaze. Redemption wasn't a word he used, but it lingered, sharp as the cold, seeping through the cracks. A sudden spike on the monitor shattered the hush, the cub's heart rate climbing, erratic, its body convulsing in tiny spasms. Elena surged forward, gloved hands flying to stabilize. "Seizure!" she barked, the words slicing the air. The team mobilized in practiced silence, Mira holding the limbs gently, Harlan prepping phenobarbital, the syringe glinting under the lights. The cub's eyes widened, pupils dilating in panic, a weak mule rising like a threadbare cry. Elias pressed closer, his hand hovering uselessly, the sight twisting like a knife, the fragility of it all, breath hitching in futile struggle. Lena burst back into the room, her face pale. "The male, he's at the gate, ramming it." The revelation hung, reframing the crisis. Not just medical, but a father's desperation bleeding through the barriers. Through the window, they saw him now, the tiger rearing against the fence, shoulders slamming with controlled fury, the chain link rattling like thunder in the quiet night. No roar, just that deep, resonant huff, each impact a plea woven with power. His eyes never left the building, nostrils flaring, scenting the distress within. The staff froze, moral suspense coiling tighter, trank him and risk the cub's isolation or let instinct clash with their world. Elias moved without thought, crossing to the door. "I'll go out. Buy time." Lena grabbed his arm, her grip iron. "You saw what he is. One wrong move." Her voice cracked, the ranger's fear surfacing. The woman who'd lost her brother to a bear attack, the scars hidden under her jacket a map of caution. But Elias shook her off gently, his eyes meeting hers. "He's not attacking us. He's fighting for his own, like any father." The words landed heavy, stirring Harlan's gaze. The vet remembered his own failure, the Fox-kit's eyes fading under his hands, the farm's cold indifference. He'd chosen protocol then, euthanizing to end suffering. Not tonight. Elena nodded curtly, injecting the sedative as the cub's spasms eased, its body going limp under the drug's veil. Stabilized, for now. But stress like this, it could kill him. The room exhaled collectively, breaths held back, tears pricking Mira's eyes as she stroked the fur softly, whispering encouragement into the quiet. The young tech's hands trembled, her idealism tested by the raw edge of survival. the cub's eyes fluttering shut, trusting in their care. Outside, the cold bit deep as Elias stepped into the yard, the gravel crunching under his boots like brittle bones. The floodlights pinned him in place, shadows stretching long. The tiger paused mid-lunge, head snapping toward the man, muscles rippling under that ghostly coat. 20 yards separated them, the fence a frail divide. Elias raised empty hands, palm out, mirroring the morning's truce. "Easy. A boy, your cub's fighting, we're helping." The words felt foolish against the wind, but the tiger's ears flicked forward, his breath clouding in great plumes. No charge, just a low rumble, vibrating through the ground, eyes locking with Elias's in silent judgment. The great cat circled then, slower, his massive form casting a pall over the snow. Scars traced his flanks. Faint lines from wires and traps, a history of human betrayal etched in flesh. Elias knelt, keeping low, the cold seeping through his jeans. Memories flooded, his son's laugh by the fire, cut short by the river's indifference. He'd begged the current that day, hands clawing water, but nature hadn't listened. Now the tiger listened, or seemed to, his head tilting, a whine escaping deep in his throat. Recognition flickered, perhaps in scent or stance, the man who'd carried his young, the one who'd bridged the wild to safety. Lena watched from the door, trank ready but unfired, her breath shallow. The other rangers murmured from the shadows, judgments fracturing. "It's a trap," one hissed, fear painting the tiger as monster. Mira joined her, whispering, "Or it's trust. Look at his eyes." The contrast sharpened, the human's trembling hands against the tiger's steady vigil, his strength misunderstood as threat. The tiger approached the fence again, nose pressing against the links, a soft huff fogging the metal. Elias inched closer, heart thundering, the air thick with the scent of wet fur and pine. "We'll save him," he murmured, voice breaking the silence. The cat's response was a single resonant chuff, approval or exhaustion, before he backed away, settling into the snow once more. The gate held, but the bond tightened, instinct's quiet justice demanding they prove worthy. Inside, the cub's breaths evened, the crisis ebbing like a receding tide. Harlan sank against the wall, rubbing his face, the revelation settling. This wasn't just survival. It was a mirror to their own losses, forcing confrontation with choices long buried. Eleanor met Elias's eyes as he returned, shivering but unbroken. "He calmed when you went out, like he knew." The words reframed the night. Compassion born from danger, the tiger's plea awakening something dormant. The wind died down, leaving the reserve in hushed expectancy. Engines idled in the lot, cooling against the dark, as the team watched the window. The white tiger's form glowed faintly, a symbol of innocence enduring, his presence a weight that pulled them toward dawn. The cub slept now, safe in their hands, but the father's shadow loomed, whispering of trials yet to come, redemption's path winding through fear and hope, where every breath mattered. The horizon lightened imperceptibly, promising revelations in the fragile light. Dawn crept over the Blackwood Reserve like a hesitant breath, painting the treetops in pale gold, while the compound below slumbered in shadowed hush. The floodlights had dimmed hours ago, leaving only the faint glow from the Wildlife Center's windows to pierce the chill. Inside the exam room, the cub lay still in its incubator, its tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of fragile recovery. The monitors whispered their approval, a steady beep that had lulled the team into wary exhaustion. Elias hadn't slept. He sat in a metal chair by the window, elbows on knees, his gaze fixed on the white tiger beyond the fence. The great cat mirrored him, hunkered in the snow, his ethereal form unmoving save for the occasional flick of an ear or the slow curl of his tail. Their eyes met across the divide, a silent vigil that spanned the night, binding man and beast in unspoken alliance. Elena Marquez entered quietly, her footsteps soft on the tile, carrying a fresh chart and a thermos of coffee that steamed in the cool air. She handed Elias a cup, the warmth seeping through the ceramic like a small mercy. "He's stable," she said, her voice low, nodding toward the cub. "The seizure was touch and go, but the meds held. We'll run tests at first light, ultrasound for any internal damage." Her eyes, shadowed from the long hours, flicked to the window. The tiger's breath clouded the dawn mist, a rhythmic plume that synced with the cub's own exhales inside. Elena paused, her hand lingering on the incubator's edge, fingers tracing the mesh. She'd seen bonds like this in the wild, elephants mourning, wolves circling lost young. But this felt different, intimate, as if the tiger's presence anchored the cub's fight. Harlan stirred from his doze in the corner, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His face creased with the lines of a man who'd wrestled ghosts all night. The vet rose slowly, approaching the incubator with the caution of one who'd learned to temper hope. The cub stirred under his gaze, a faint mewl escaping, its milky eyes cracking open to fix on him. Harlan's breath hitched, unbidden memories surfacing. The fox kits, small and slick with rain, their bodies cooling on the barn floor as he arrived too late. He'd chosen mercy then, a needle's quick end. But the eyes haunted him still, pleading, trusting until the last. Now, this cub's gaze held no accusation, only instinct's raw plea. His hand trembled as he adjusted the blanket, the soft fur brushing his skin like a whisper of forgiveness. "You're a tough one," he murmured. The words dissolving into the quiet, his resolve hardening against the pull of doubt. Outside, the tiger rose fluidly, shaking frost from his coat, the movement sending a ripple through the snow. He paced the fence line, paused silent but purposeful, his massive head turning toward the building, as if scenting the air for change. A low chuff echoed, vibrating through the walls. Drawing Lena from the hallway, the ranger's face was drawn, her jacket zipped tight against the morning bite, but her stance had softened overnight. No trank in hand, just a flashlight clipped to her belt. "He's been at it since you came back in," she said to Elias, joining him at the window. Her breath fogged the glass, mirroring the tiger's own. Lena's history weighed heavy now, the brother's attack a scar that made every shadow a threat. Yet watching the cat's patient circuit, she felt the fracture. Fear yielding to something deeper, a recognition that survival demanded trust, not just barriers. The cub's monitor spiked again, a sharp alarm cutting the dawn's fragile peace. Elena whirled, the team converging in hushed urgency. The little one's body arched, limbs twitching in another wave, its breaths coming in ragged hitches that filled the room with the scent of distress, wet fur, and the faint metallic tang of fear sweat. "Another seizure," Elena said, her voice steady but edged with tension, hands flying to the controls. Mira held the cub gently, tears welling as she whispered, "Easy, little guy, we're here." The young tech's hands shook, her idealism clashing with the raw vulnerability before her. The cub's eyes wide, pupils dilating in silent panic, a tiny paw clawing at the air. Elias surged to his feet, heart pounding, the alarm echo of the river's roar in his mind. His son's face flashed, small, gasping, hands reaching as the current pulled. He'd frozen then, paralyzed by the impossible choice. Not now. He crossed to the door, ignoring Lena's protest. "I'll calm him. The father, he knows." The words tumbled out, conviction born from the night's revelations. Eleanor hesitated, syringe poised, then nodded. "Go. But be quick. We can't lose ground." The cold air hit Elias like a slap as he stepped out, gravel crunching underfoot, the dawn light gilding the fence in frost-laced silver. The tiger halted his pace, head snapping toward the man, muscles coiling beneath that ghostly pelt. Elias raised his hands slowly, palms out, approaching the gate with deliberate steps. 20 yards, 10. The air thickened with the tiger's scent, wild and primal, mingling with pine and earth. The great cat's eyes locked on, unblinking, a low rumble building in his chest, not threat, but question. Elias stopped at the fence, gripping the lynx, his voice soft against the wind. "Your boy's fighting again. Hear him?" As if in answer, a faint mewl carried from inside, threading the morning chill. The tiger's ears perked, nostrils flaring, and he pressed forward, nose inches from Elias's hand through the mesh. The warmth of his breath washed over the man's skin, hot and alive, eyes softening in recognition, the scent of the one who'd carried his cub, the hands that bridged worlds. A whine escaped, deep and resonant, vibrating through the fence like a father's unspoken vow. Elias's throat tightened, tears blurring the dawn. The parallel struck deep, the tiger's grief mirroring his own lost pleas. "We'll save him," he whispered, the promise hanging between them. Instinct's quiet justice sealing the pact. Inside, the seizure ebbed under Elena's care, the cub slumping into exhausted stillness, its breaths evening as the alarm silenced. Harlan exhaled, sinking back, the moment reframing his failures. The fox-kit's eyes now overlaid with this cub's trust, redemption's whisper easing the old ache. Lena watched from the door, her breath shallow, the ranger's walls crumbling at the sight. Man and tiger, divided yet connected, compassion forged in the fire of shared desperation. The tiger backed away then, settling once more, his form a sentinel in the rising light. Elias returned inside, shivering but unbroken, the team's eyes on him carrying new weight, the revelation that bonds like this transcended fear, forcing each to confront their morality. Mira wiped her eyes, a small smile breaking through. "He listened. To you." The words lingered, emotional truth blooming in the quiet. The tiger's plea had awakened them all, silent connections weaving through loss and hope. As the sun crested the hills, warming the frost-kissed ground, the reserve stirred to life, birds calling, distant engines humming. The cub slept deeply now, safe in the incubator's glow, while outside, the white tiger's gaze held steady, a symbol of endurance. The day promised more trials, but in that moment, kindness's fragile thread held firm, pulling them toward horizons yet unseen. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of this white tiger reach more people who still believe in kindness. The sun hung low over the Blackwood Reserve, its rays slanting through the pines like fingers of reluctant warmth, chasing the last shadows from the compound. Inside the wildlife center, the exam room felt smaller now, the air thick with the scent of heated blankets and the faint, milky residue of formula. The cub lay in its incubator, limbs splayed in the exhaustion of survival, its white fur fluffed against the soft glow of the warming lamp. Elias remained by the window, his chair creaking faintly under his weight, the thermos of coffee long gone cold in his grip. The tiger outside mirrored the quiet, his massive form stretched along the fence line, head resting on crossed paws, eyes half-lidded but alert, a guardian etched in the fading light. Elena Marquez hovered over the monitors, her movements precise, the soft click of buttons underscoring the hush. The cub's vitals had held steady through the morning, but a shadow lingered in her expression, the kind born from too many close calls. Harlan sat nearby, his hands folded, the tremor from the night's seizures a ghost in his fingers. He'd spoken little since dawn, his gaze drifting to the cub's rising chest, each breath a small defiance against the wild's indifference. Mira bustled quietly, adjusting the drip line. Her earlier tears dried, but her eyes still rimmed red, the weight of hope pressing on her young shoulders. Lena had stepped out hours ago, patrolling the perimeter, but her absence felt like a held breath, the ranger's caution a thread woven into the room's tension. A faint wheeze broke the rhythm, the cub's exhale turning labored, its body stiffening under the blanket. Elena leaned in, stethoscope cold against fur, her face tightening. "Respiratory distress," she murmured, the words slicing the quiet like a blade. The monitor's lines jagged upward, alarms priming in warning. The team converged without a sound, hands moving in silent choreography, Mira steadying the tiny form, Harlan prepping oxygen, Elena's gloved fingers probing gently for the source. The cub's eyes fluttered open wide and milky, a soft mule escaping like a threadbare plea. Its chest heaved erratically, ribs straining against skin, the struggle etched in every shallow hitch. Elias rose, the chair scraping back, his pulse sinking with the frantic beeps. Outside, the tiger stirred, ears pricking forward as if sensing the shift through the walls. A low rumble built, vibrating the glass, his body uncoiling to pace once more, flanks rippling, tail lashing in slow arcs of agitation. The great cat's eyes fixed on the window, nostrils flaring, the air between them charged with unspoken urgency. Elias pressed his palm to the pane, the cold seeping into his skin, memories crashing like waves, the river's roar, his son's small hand slipping from his grasp, the helplessness that had carved hollows in his nights. He'd failed to bridge that current, frozen by fear. This cub's fight demanded he cross another divide, instinct calling to instinct across glass and steel. Lena burst through the door, breath clouding from the chill outside, her face flushed. He's charging the east fence again, not full force, but he's desperate. Her words hung, reframing the crisis, the father's vigil turning to action, the barriers humans built buckling under raw need. Through the window, they saw it. The tiger rearing against the chain link, shoulders slamming with measured power, the metal groaning under the assault. No roar tore the air, just that deep, resonant huff, each impact a vibration that echoed the cub's labored breaths. Dust stirred at his paws, snow scattering like fragile promises, his white coat gleaming in the sun's descent. Harlan's hands paused over the oxygen mask, his eyes meeting Elias's. The vet's voice cracked the silence, low and raw. "I can't watch another one fade, not like the kits." The revelation spilled unbidden, his history fracturing the clinical mask, the farm road, the rain-slicked bodies, the choice to end suffering rather than fight for it. Guilt had chained him since, turning every rescue into a debt unpaid. Now, with the cub's wheeze filling the room, he moved faster, securing the mask with trembling resolve, the mist blooming faintly against it. Mira whispered encouragement, her own tears held back, hands gentle on the fur. "Breathe, little one. For him." Elena nodded to Elias, her decision unspoken. "Go. Your voice calmed him before. We need time." He didn't hesitate, stepping into the yard where the cold clawed at his jacket, gravel biting through his boots. The tiger halted mid-lunge, head snapping toward him, muscles taut under that ethereal pelt. Elias approached the fence slowly, hands raised, the sun warming his back like a fleeting ally. 10 yards, 5. The air thickened with the tiger's scent, wild and alive, mingling with the pine's sharp tang. The great cat's eyes locked on, unblinking. A whine building deep in his throat as another chuff from inside reached them, faint but piercing. Elias gripped the lynx, voice steady against the wind. "She's fighting, boy, just like you." The tiger pressed forward, nose brushing the mesh inches from Elias's fingers, hot breath washing over his skin. In that moment, recognition flickered, not just in stance but deeper. The faint scar on Elias's hand from a poacher's trap years back when he'd freed a snared tiger in these same woods. The great cat had been younger then, wounded and wary. Elias the stranger who'd cut the wires under moonlight. Instinct remembered, scent bridging the years. The tiger's whine softened, head tilting in a gesture of trust, his massive form easing back from the assault. The assault on the fence ceased, the chain link sighing in relief, but the emotional truth reframed everything. This wasn't chance. The tiger had sought Elias not by accident, but by memory's pull, a silent justice delivered through survival's thread. Inside, the cub's wheeze steadied under the oxygen's flow, breaths deepening into rhythm, the monitor's lines smoothing. Harlan exhaled, sinking against the table, redemption's weight lifting like dawn's first light. Lena watched from the door, her breath hitching, the ranger's fears dissolving in the scene. Man and tiger, connected across scars and species, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the reserve in hues of amber and shadow, the team gathered at the window. The cub slept now, chest rising strong, the crisis ebbing into quiet victory. Elena's hand rested on the incubator, a small smile breaking through. She'll make it, with time. Mira nodded, tears spilling freely, while Harlan's eyes shone with unspoken release. The kit's ghosts fading in the cub's steady pulse. Outside, the tiger rose one last time, circling the fence before pausing at the tree line. His gaze met Elias's through the glass, a final chuff carrying on the breeze. Farewell woven with gratitude. He turned then, melting into the pines, his white form vanishing like mist, but not gone. The wild called him home, pride waiting perhaps in hidden dens. Elias lingered, the cold settling deep, but warmth bloomed within, the redemption of a father saved, his own loss honored in the act. In the days that followed, the cub grew under careful watch, her eyes sharpening, paws testing strength on soft earth. The reserve whispered of the miracle, townsfolk gathering at the gates, their judgments softened by the tale. Compassion had bloomed from fear, silent connections enduring beyond the fences. Elias walked the paths at dawn, rifle traded for binoculars, the forest's hush a companion now. Survival's weight lifted, replaced by hope's quiet roar. And in the end, as the cub took her first unaided steps, a white tigress, emerging from strength reborn, she paused at the enclosure's edge, gazing toward the horizon where her father had gone. The sun crested high, gilding her fur, and she stepped forward, into the wild's embrace, cubs of her own one day to follow, a legacy of instinct and kindness walking free. The wind carried the scent of pine and promise, engines cooling in the distance as the world turned kinder for having witnessed. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching. The case of a white tiger begged a man to save his dying cub. What happened later was unbelievable. See you in the next one.